Welcome back to this Season 13, Episode 38 of the Ubuntu podcast. Today we're going to be discussing cloud gaming. We've got some Googly Love and all your wonderful feedback. And joining me to debate all those things are Mark.
Hello, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Not bad.
Good. And Alan, how are you?
Tickety-boo.
Really? I am shocked and surprised by that. So, if you're tickety-boo, why would that be? What have you been doing?
I've been playing with a new toy.
Really?
Yes. It's a Raspberry Pi 400 in the thing in a keyboard thing. So, as part of work, I've been testing out some ARM applications, which happen to be snaps, as you'll be unsurprised to hear, and discovering some interesting issues, bugs, problems, especially with things that haven't been tested on a Pi before. So yeah, it's been quite interesting. The first challenge I had was getting dual screen working, and it turns out it was my monitor that was bad. So yeah, I can't quite figure out what's wrong with it, but it seems to not be telling the host computer what the EDID is, so it just shows up as a monitor and doesn't seem to. I can't figure out why.
Are your monitors identical?
Yes. I have two next to each other. Okay. They are exactly the same. And one of them just doesn't show any EDID info.
So what you can do is you can dump the EDID info from the good monitor, and then you can pass that as a kernel boot parameter to load into the other monitor.
This is true. The internet's Matthew Garrett told me this on Twitter when I complained about this. And I thought, no, too much effort, not doing that. So I just moved the Pi to a different desk that has a different two monitors on it, and which is the desk I normally sit at, and I've got it plugged into HDMI switches. So I can have either or both of the screens as my main desktop or the Raspberry Pi, so I can have one screen there and one screen there with different content on from the two different machines, and it makes it easy for me to document what I'm doing on one computer while testing on the other. It's quite a nice setup.
Mark, what have you been up to?
Well, last time I spoke about how I'd been installing OpenMW, and since then I've been playing OpenMW.
I thought you were going to say you're still installing it. It's really big.
I've been reminding myself why I love the game so much, but also it's been quite cool to see, because this game is 15 or so years old, and it came on a CD, so you can imagine that these days the graphics look a bit ropey, but it's an immensely moddable game. So in the interim, people have done things like developing improved meshes and textures, which you can install as mods, so that if you're playing it at a higher resolution on a modern computer, you can have a much nicer, higher res experience, which is quite cool, even though all of the gameplay is exactly the same.
And are they the same textures but just upscaled and tweaked a bit, or are they brand new textures?
There's various options. So some of them, they've completely created whole new models and new textures to go with them. Wow. But there's one of the ones that I've installed, because I didn't want to be replacing every asset in the game, is there's a project which has just taken the base textures and then used some AIML stuff to just upscale them up to sort of 4K resolution compatible, and then you just stick those in and it replaces the standard ones, and they look a lot like, there's not any more detail, but they don't look as blurry when they're on a high resolution monitor.
Amazing.
Which is quite cool. Yes.
Impressive stuff.
Yeah, it's really good fun.
And I mean, how do you find the game experience? Is it as good or better than you remember it, first time round with the original title?
I'm playing it a bit because it's quite a big world, and it's a free roaming adventure, but there's a sort of travel system which you can use to jump between towns on the map and so on. And so when I was first playing it, I had the impression that everything was miles and miles apart, and it would take you hours to walk between it all. But actually, now that I've tried, it's kind of like if you're in London and you only take the tube, and then you try walking between two tube stations, and you realise that they're 200 metres apart from each other. So actually, realising that it's not as big a world as I thought, but what gets you is the detail of each location makes it feel like there's so much there that it must be enormous. It's quite clever.
Right. Well, enjoy playing that. I'll look forward to hearing how you fare in the next episode. But until then, let's move on with the rest of the show. So, continuing some discussion about playing computer games, I thought it would be good to revisit a discussion we had some time ago, which is cloud gaming. And I suppose before we get into a discussion about cloud gaming, we should probably sort of just define what we're referring to here for the benefit of people who haven't experienced this or, tried it or heard about it.
Of which I am one.
Okay, so this is going to be an interesting conversation a bit later. So, Alan, how would you sort of summarize, what cloud gaming is?
It's tricky because you could argue it's the modern way to stream a game from, a fast computer that's remote. And that might be a modern thing. But actually, it's been around a long time. There are loads of people who play web games, and those games are not installed on your computer. You go to a URL and you play a web-based game. So there's a lot of it about, but the technology is very different these days. And so you're streaming usually these days a video feed of what's going on the remote computer. Whereas in the past, you might be getting JavaScript or HTML and images, or it might be Flash or something like that. But I think all of these are cloud gaming because you're playing the game. Right. The game resides on somebody else's computer, basically. But I think for this topic, I think we're talking about the modern incarnation, right?
So these are the ones where you launch a game somewhere on the internet and you effectively interact with a live streamed, version of that game.
So there are two models of this that occur to me in my head when you describe that. So the first off is basically you're renting a VM with a powerful graphics card, and then you can play. You basically log into that remotely and you play your games on it. And the other one is something like Spotify for games, where you're subscribed to a library of games and you're using an application to launch and play those games. Which one of those is the more common scenario here?
I think they're orthogonal. I don't think you're talking about two different. So one, you're talking about the technical aspects of how you launch the game, and the other one, you're talking about the business model. And those are two entirely separate things.
Okay.
It really doesn't matter what the business model is to how the technical side is, and the technical side doesn't implement the business model. I think they're different things. One may be subscription, one may be pay-per-play, one may be you get to use your own games, another one may be you renting games or something like that. I think they're very different, and I think there's a couple of options, and you will discover the limitations and the benefits of both of them if we go through them, I think.
Well then, let's discuss the options.
So was the one that you've been playing a lot, or you've had for longest, Martin, is you had NVIDIA Grid, didn't you? I remember you mentioning that a while back.
That was what it was called when we first started using it. We accessed that initially through our NVIDIA Shield, and we enrolled into the beta program for that. And that's now become GeForce Now. So we've had that for, I think, maybe 3 years, maybe a bit longer than that even. And it's pretty impressive stuff. I have played some games on that. And as part of the beta, I had access to a load of games I didn't have to buy, which was also kind of appealing.
So is that a subscription service you pay?
It is. Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be. So it does have a free tier, but when you request to play a game, you're like put in a queue as to when a VM is going to be allocated to you. But if you're a subscription member, then you always will have a machine allocated to you.
Right, but that's artificial scarcity to get you to upgrade to a paid account, right?
I imagine.
Right, just like the advert feed in Spotify. It's annoying enough that you'd want to pay, right?
Right. And it's £4.99 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're basically holding a tablet computer in your hands, and the game is not running on that thing. The game is running out there somewhere on a machine.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really matter what the technical details of that machine are. It's a remote machine, and the game is running on that. And you're seeing a video feed, basically, of what's going on that remote computer, and your inputs are being sent to that computer.
Yes, exactly so. And then the other one that I also use frequently is Stadia from Google. So, the technologies your experience is broadly the same. There are some differences I'll get to, but that Stadia is optionally £8.99 a month as a Stadia founder. And that grants you some free games every month, a bit like the Humble Bundle subscription works, where you pay some money and every month they gift you some games.
But the market difference being with Humble Bundle, if you stop paying, you still have the downloaded games that you can play. Whereas with Stadia, if you stop paying, you can't play anymore.
Not necessarily. So I don't know how this works for the games I've claimed through Stadia Pro, through the subscription model. I don't know if I get to keep those forever or for always. I'm going to guess that I don't. I've not actually looked into it.
Well, I don't pay anymore. I did have it for a short while, and I don't see those games anymore.
Okay, so then. You know the answer to that. And then, but there are games that I have purchased on Stadia, so I own them. So if I was to stop subscribing to...
For the record, Martin did bunny ears when he said own them.
We get to that. So I own those games, and I would be able to access those if I stopped paying in for the Pro subscription.
But if Stadia were to shut down, can you only play those games on Stadia? So if Stadia shuts down, you then lose the ability to play those games, or do you have... could you install it on your own computer if you didn't want to play it on Stadia at some point?
We don't know because Stadia hasn't shut down.
Could you take that game which you've bought on Stadia and install it locally and run it?
No, because Stadia is a cloud gaming service where everything runs over there. Well, I know it was a bit silly, but my point was we don't know. Yeah. Like because your question was if they shut down, and if they shut down, there may well be a massive brouhaha from all these people who've bought loads of games, and they might say, "Okay, we'll give you Steam keys for all these things," or we just don't know. It is entirely probable, though, that yes, if the service was shut down because it wasn't profitable enough for Google, it would be okay, bye, and you get to keep your controller.
So as we're talking about like ownership of games, I was thinking about this, and I don't feel like my ownership of games on Stadia is actually any different of my ownership of games in Steam. Because if Valve were to shutter, I don't have those games. They're in the cloud. In order to install those games, I have to use the Steam client, and I have to download them via the Steam client. And for many of the games, they interact with Steam's sort of, SDK and infrastructure to do game saves and all the rest of it. So Valve is to shutter. I don't think it's actually any different from using one of these cloud platforms.
I don't think you can say that, because Valve have a long history of not having shut down. Google have a long history of shutting things down that are not profitable. So I think they're very different. Just by looking at the past history of those two companies, I think you could make an educated guess that Valve are probably not going to shut down in the next year to 18 months. I could not confidently say that about Stadia.
I think another difference is, there's the fact that I don't have my whole library of games from Steam downloaded, but I could, that's one thing. But also, if I've got a game that's installed on my computer and Valve goes away, then there is the possibility I still have those files that I can execute on my computer, and I might be able to work around what Steam needs to be there for. Whereas I suppose the difference is if Stadia goes away, I've got no way of creating the Stadia bit because it's also got the game in.
And you wouldn't be alone in being frustrated by not being able to play your Steam games. If Valve went away, there would be a lot of people online who would be motivated to unlock that software that they've purchased. And I know, Valve become in the line for a lot of stick, but part of their raison d'etre is every game is sacred and every game should carry on running. that these games should continue working into the future. I know that's their internal feeling about if you bought a game 10 years ago, it should carry on running now, unless the developer has done something stupid like shut down their own servers or uploaded a duff package or something. It should just carry on working. And I feel like that passion they have isn't something that I feel Google has with Stadia. I feel like at the point when it becomes unprofitable, it will go away, and so would your games.
So, Martin, how does GeForce Now compare to that in terms of, do you have to have licenses for the games that you want to play on GeForce Now already?
Sort of. So, GeForce Now actually hooks into your accounts on other game launchers. So it will hook into, so it will launch EA Origin or it will launch Steam, and you sign in with your Steam account. So you can only play games on Steam that are supported by GeForce Now. And if you don't own them, of course, you can buy them through, that interaction and in order to get access to them. But, all of the Uplay, all of the different game launchers are there. So what I find interesting about, both these platforms is, as a Linux user, this gives me access to a bunch of titles that I would otherwise be unable to play, because I can play Apex Legends using this, and PUBG, and Cyberpunk 2077 whenever that comes out next year or whatever it's going to be. So this is why I find these interesting, because both these platforms open up my catalogue of games that I can access.
I tried GeForce Now. There's a desktop version of it. It's a Electron thing. So I bundled it up as a Snap and chucked it in the Snap store. And as part of that, I obviously had to test that. And so I launched the application, and sure enough, as Martin says, you just have a button to connect it to your Steam account, and you go through the dance of logging into Steam and authorizing it as a third-party application. And as soon as you've done that, your Steam collection just appears in the GeForce Now application as like a front end, like a storefront with all the games you already own. You just click one and it launches on a machine in someone's data center somewhere, and then full screen, the game comes up and you play it like you would play it locally, but you can play it on a computer that isn't technically capable of playing that game. So I think the capability for someone who can't afford a super high spec PC, but is able to play a game on another remote computer, it could be, there's plenty of use cases for this where, a kid who doesn't have a super powerful computer in their bedroom, but wants to be able to play the latest game that their friends play. This enables that.
Yeah. So you don't have to have a super powerful computer locally. What do you need in terms of an internet connection?
A good one.
Yes, generally decent. So I forget which way round it is, but I think 15 megabits is like the sort of minimum requirement, and I think that's for GeForce Now. And I think they prefer 25 megabit down in order to sort of work the best.
And bear in mind the resolution that you run the game at is going to be, is going to affect the bit rate that you're going to need.
Yeah.
So if it can run at 720p and you're okay running it, if your motivation is, I want to be able to play this game, I want to experience this game, and not, I want to experience this game at the full frame rate at 4K resolution or 8K or whatever, and I want to have absolutely perfect response when I hit the button, I want to shoot the guy, because there's going to be some latency in there. If your use case is playing a good game, but not necessarily at the highest resolution, at the highest frame rate, then it's totally viable.
So there is a couple of differences between GeForce and Stadia. Stadia pretty much hides away all of the graphical settings. You can't, change the resolution and, all those tunables. But on GeForce Now, it's just like you're running it on your PC. So you can change the resolution. But what I find interesting is on GeForce Now, you'll load a game and pretty much everything is maxed out in the settings anyway. It's set to a 1080p resolution, which you can lower, of course, which then helps with, input latency and, lower bandwidth connections. So I think from this then, Alan, you've tried GeForce Now and Stadia, and Mark, you've not experimented with any of these cloud gaming platforms.
No, I just stream internally from my Steam box to other places in my house.
Right. So you are game streaming in a sense then, in order to
just over a very shorter distance.
Right.
Yeah. My latency is minimal.
But you are doing what Alan said. You are effectively therefore playing a game on a computer that isn't capable of playing the game that you're playing.
Yes, exactly. I have one very powerful computer and several less powerful computers.
Yeah, I do the same at home with Steam Link. I have a Steam Link under the TV and play games remotely from another computer in another room. And it's just a wonderful way to not have a super powerful computer everywhere that you want to be able to play a game. You can play wherever you've got an internet connection, a controller, and the device. It's pretty awesome.
And you don't have to have a big, ugly, noisy computer in your lounge just so you can play good games on your TV.
Yeah, you have a tiny little thing about the size of a Raspberry Pi underneath your TV.
You mentioned you can play GeForce Now through a desktop app. What are the requirements for Stadia? Do you have a special device for playing that, or is that an app that you install?
On my PC, I just use a web browser. I actually use Google Chrome because I figure that's like probably going to work best there. So I just use Chrome. In fact, I have a profile and it's the only thing in there, and I just launch it. I have to say the experience of Stadia as like getting a game and starting a game, it's instant. You just game, play, go, and it's off and running. GeForce Now feels a little bit more fiddly, and quite often, if you haven't played a game for a while and you click on it, it says, oh, now you need to authenticate with Steam, and you have to go through that, business. And then it, takes a bit of time to launch the VM and launch the game, whereas Stadia is very sort of immediate. I much prefer the experience on Stadia. It's improved considerably over the last year, I have to say.
I'd be interested to know from our listeners what experience they have with these things, and if anyone's tried to build their own, like you have, Mark, where you've got your own internal Stadia. Has anyone tried building their own thing in the cloud? Like, what if you wanted to spend a day gaming and you spin up some VPS in the cloud that's got a GPU connected, and then, use some remote protocol? I don't know. Has anyone done this? Has anyone made an open GeForce Now or open Stadia or something like that for you to install Steam or Epic Launcher or whatever on a remote machine? It seems like the kind of nerdy thing that our listeners would do.
And now it is time for some Googly Love. And Alan, I do believe you have been tinkering with this here bit of GUI.
I have. It's called uLauncher, and it's on a website called ulauncher.io. All the best things have an IO domain. And it's an application launcher. It's a bit like, is it Alfred on the Mac? Or Albert or something like that?
Is it Spotlight?
Spotlight, yeah, a bit like that. I think that Spotlight's the first party one, and Albert or Alfred or something like that is a third party one. I'm confused. A bit like Gnome Do in the old days. It's a launcher that's always running, and when you press a certain combination of keys, you get a box pop up in the middle of the screen, a very pretty box in the middle of the screen, and you start typing the name of the application that you want, or lots of other things. It's got a bunch of interesting additional things you can search for, like emoji. So you can type a couple of letters, and then when you type, like horse or whatever you want, an emoji horse, you type horse, and an array of horses appear on your screen, and you can press a keyboard shortcut to grab one of those into the clipboard. But mainly it's for launching applications. So you just, you hit the keyboard shortcut, start typing, the name of your application appears, and you just press enter, and it's an alternative launcher.
Probably what's worth just explaining there is that emoji picker that you refer to, that it's an extensible platform. So you install the components that you want. So in addition to launching applications, which is what it does by default, you can also pick the extensions that integrate with the applications and software you have installed on your machines. So different password managers, for example, can be queried and all of that sort of thing. It's very flexible.
Wow. And there are loads.
Yeah, it's well supported. Lots of support for, session management of all of the different desktop environments. Not Mate. Boo. I'm going to write one.
It's really good. I really like it. I sometimes forget that I've got it because I don't launch a lot of applications during the day. I tend to launch the same things all the time. And GNOME Shell has a launcher. I can just press the super key and start typing something. And I know some people are probably thinking now, why on earth would you do this? And that's because the launcher in GNOME Shell has a fixed set of features, really, unless you add extensions. Whereas ULauncher is built with a whole bunch of these extensions, like you say, like the emoji one. And it's also quite pretty and quite fast.
It is. So there it is, ULauncher. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. And now it is time for all of your wonderful feedback. We have some more Ubuntu is not boring feedback. Corey Clinton emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I enjoyed your piece on Ubuntu being boring, and I would declare myself as avidly pro-boredom. Do you know what else is boring? My car starting every day so that I can do the things I need to do. A rocket ship that may or may not explode as it approaches escape velocity is far more exciting, but most of my use cases are far more geared towards the first thing.
Oh, Corey, that's brilliant. That's my favourite bit of feedback we've had for some time. Jorian Carstark emailed us.
I just wanted to list out a few things that I found to be really exciting, which came from Ubuntu and Canonical relatively recently. ZFS support out of the box, LexD, the minimal install feature, first-class Raspberry Pi setup, and the MicroCates Snap.
Interesting, yeah. It's funny, we tend to focus on the Ubuntu desktop and we forget about some of these other things that, some of which other people don't have or other distros don't have. Yeah.
And Chris McDonough emailed us.
I'm wondering if there's a reasonably easy way to get the Steam Link working on a Raspberry Pi 4 with Ubuntu 20.04 or later, or there perhaps are some tips to faking the current Raspbian package to believing its dependencies have been met on Ubuntu. I haven't tried this, have you, Martin?
Yes, and in fact, I have a PPA for the Steam Link, and I will dig it out and put a link to that in the show notes. Because one of the things I do is I have a Steam Link. I have a Steam Link, but I actually use a Raspberry Pi running Ubuntu Mate with the Steam Link app installed on it downstairs. Jason Armstrong emailed us about one of Alan's snaps.
If I install the snap for Sosumi, can I install programs, something I might need for work? Is every instance of Sosumi a new installation?
So Sosumi is, for those who don't know, a snap which is a collection of shell scripts and Python and QEMU Virgil and spins up a virtual machine with macOS inside it. And it was done just as a bit of fun, really, but it got a bit popular and quite a few people use it. You can install software in it. It's proper macOS inside a VM. You get no guarantees and no warranty. And if it breaks, you get to keep all the pieces. But yeah, you can install software in it, but it's really just a thing that automates the creation of a virtual machine disk and then goes and gets the installer for macOS and then installs macOS inside this thing. It's not much more than that.
Yeah, and you say it's popular. I saw Sosumi featured in a high-profile tech YouTuber video recently.
Oh, really?
Yes. They're a Hackintosh channel. And instead of doing the Hackintosh thing, they actually put Ubuntu on this PC, and then they were running macOS by way of Sosumi in order to install all the applications that they needed.
Oh, crikey. That'll be why it suddenly shot up in the number of users it's got then.
That'll be it. Joe, not that one, emailed us.
I often need to calculate the local time in various countries to schedule meetings for work. Not satisfied with opening a web browser and hunting for the local time, especially with most sites pointing only to the current time, I wrote a quick script to do an hourly calculation on the fly. I decided to also use that as a base for inclusion about Linux bash scripting, file permissions, and general command line usage. Though extremely basic, I thought it might be helpful for those looking to learn about bash scripting, and perhaps you may even find it useful, or spot a bug. And there's a link in the show notes.
And Nigel Verity emailed us about rural broadband.
I live in a very rural location in Shropshire, and our village suffered not only slow ADSL speeds, but lots of outages as well due to old and corroded copper cabling. Few in the community have regular 9 to 5 jobs, being mainly self-employed or home workers, A decent internet service was increasingly important, only BT were not planning to install fibre for another 2 to 3 years. I canvassed everyone in my community and managed to get a radio-based broadband service implemented, funded almost entirely by a voucher scheme financed by the government. From canvassing to first connection took about 6 months, but crucially, from funding agreement to first connection was only about a month. Radio instead of physical cabling is so much simpler. It's not blisteringly fast, but we do get 30 megabits a second, which is fast enough for most people. The irony is that once BT got wind of the fact that there was now competition in the area, they brought forward their plans to provide a fibre connection by over a year, and we now have the choice of 2 providers.
Brilliant.
So my experience is exactly like Nigel's here. So some years ago, we were in the same position, and a local organisation called High Wi-Fi created, a wireless internet service provider to service those of us that couldn't get broadband. I think we had 16 megabits, and this going back a few years. And once this rolled out, BT came in and installed fibre to the curb. Ian Scott emailed Thinkpad Corner.
I was listening to the latest episode, and there was a listener question about whether to run a media server on a desktop or use a cloud VPS. One of you recommended using an old laptop instead, and that's exactly what I do to get use out of an old ThinkPad. I have an old ThinkPad T410S sat happily running Ubuntu 18.04, serving media via Plex and several other tasks like Pi-hole. On cost, I think once you add the cost of a Raspberry Pi power supply and case and disk, etc., it's probably cheaper to get an old ThinkPad. Yeah, it can be. And if the battery's not completely shot, you've got a UPS on it and it's got a display and a keyboard built in. So, yeah, it does make sense. And the T410 is a very nice machine. Yes, good choice.
It is. And Bryson Hibbits also emailed Thinkpad Corner.
In a recent episode, Alan mentioned how he so enjoyed his ThinkPad keyboard that he found himself excited to type replies on it. This got me thinking. For my desktop, I've been using a mechanical keyboard, and I became envious of my ThinkPad X1 Carbon. For me, the ease of computing and the feeling of typing on that keyboard have become somewhat synonymous. I did some digging and found a company called Tex Electronics who puts out handsome ThinkPad-esque mechanical keyboard, so I ordered one to give it a try. Of course, my search almost took me to Lenovo, and I had an easy time picking out their latest ThinkPad TrackPoint keyboard, which I also ordered because you can never be too sure.
Yes, the Shinobi, the Tex Shinobi is the one I have. It's a delightful keyboard. I love it. And I even recently bought the Bluetooth module because I didn't buy that initially. And the Bluetooth module is a thing you add on. You take 2 screws out, take a blanking plate off, put the module in, and then you just shove a couple of AA batteries in, and it's now magically a Bluetooth keyboard. It's fantastic.
Very nice too. And that rounds up all your feedback. Thank you for sending it in. And that, in fact, rounds up episode 38. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week when we'll be discussing community goings-ons and our favourite picks from the grown-up tech news. If you'd like to send us your feedback, you can email show@ubuntupodcast.org. And if you hurry, while stocks last, there are a few subscriptions on our YouTube channel to get us over 1,000 subscribers. We'll speak to you next time.